black, sorry, in black, are called SVRs. They are called sustained virological responders. And the patients in gray that do not respond to this treatment are called non-responders. Interestingly, the levels of 221 are very significantly different from one another. These are the levels in dendritic cells. So what does it mean? We have already shown that 221 going down in response to interferon alpha, going down will lead to accumulation of all the proteins that cause cell death. So if people who do not respond to interferon alpha keep their 221 levels down, it means the proteins that actually kill the cells will stay up and eventually cause more cell death. So corresponding to what we saw here, there was proof of this, that yes, people who do not respond, they have less frequency of the dendritic cells in the blood because more of them die potentially. So this is a good proof that 221 is a very crucial mediator of antiviral immune response, particularly by managing the survival of dendritic cells. It somehow controls how long these cells live because their lifespan is directly proportional to the antiviral immune response they generate. So just to conclude, what I've shown you so far is microRNAs, they do not code for any protein, yet they have very profound roles in micromanaging our immune system. And the title is Small Engines, Big Power because they are very small molecules, just about 20 to 25 nucleotides long. Usually a gene is about 2,000 to 3,000 nucleotides, or even more. This is just 25 nucleotides long, but does a really good job of micromanaging the expression of so many other proteins. What is most important is that several of these microRNA-based therapeutics are in clinical trials. For example, if I determine that this microRNA is actually helping the virus, actually it's detrimental for our body's immune defense, we can actually have technologies to target that microRNA, stop its function. And that's what is being currently employed. The interdisciplinary aspect of what my research says is how to deliver this effectively. So if you have hepatitis C virus infecting the liver, it's difficult to reach the liver cells. Just because of the anatomy of the liver, it's very difficult to reach the right cell which is infected with the virus. But if you can somehow, with the help of all the people who develop drugs and formulations, if you can reach out to those cells and send a microRNA that stops that microRNA, we can achieve great success. So a lot of companies have actually taken this approach. Now what's more interesting is in terms of, again, interdisciplinary, we need to do a lot of tissue research, we need to do a lot of tissue engineering, because there is a lot of information that says that one cell can send out microRNAs to another cell. So if you isolate, at any given point, if you isolate your blood and try to isolate a lot of microRNAs in the blood, just not the cell, just blood, you will see there are so many microRNAs floating in the blood. They are being sent out as chemical messengers, like hormones. Hormones get sent out from pituitary or to the feet. Similarly, microRNAs are being secreted by the donor cells and are being received and being endocytosed by the recipient cells, and they act as messengers throughout the body. So there is intercellular communication. For that, we need good tissue engineering. If we can kind of engineer a tissue and study the transfer of microRNAs between different cells of the same tissue, we can understand the whole systems and how it works. So that's something that has not been very well attended. We need to have good ways to understand how the intercellular communication impacts the whole organ. Well, with that, I just acknowledge my thesis committee who helped me with all the technologies I needed to develop, all the collaborators. We've had so many clinical samples sent out to us in my period of PhD and all the lab members. Thank you.
I didn't do a very good job of keeping that to the time slots. For that, I apologize. But they were talking about such interesting things that I didn't have the heart to put up my hand and say, hey, look, stop, stop, stop. We do have some time for a couple of questions, if you guys don't have to rush out the door. So, do I have anyone who needs an answer? Check.
I'll start. I have a question about the second presenter, actually. You talked about hepatitis C and some possible applications of your research with that. I was just wondering how your research compares to the drugs that are recently developed to fight hepatitis C. I believe there was one that was released this year, beginning of this year, and there was a huge debate on how expensive of a treatment it was.
Yeah, so you're talking about the drug sofosbuvir, came out in 2014, early 2014. Yeah, I mean, you have to achieve a trade-off. As you rightly mentioned, these drugs are so expensive, and there is always a danger of developing drug resistance. HCV is very capable of developing drug resistance, as is the case with most pathogens. If you make such an expensive drug and over a period of 10 years, HCV has developed drug resistance, you're back to square one, and again, trying to develop another drug against the variants. And the variants, when they develop drug resistance, become even more virulent and even more invincible. They become like teenagers. So that is one way to think about it. Although this drug is doing a wonderful job, 75% of people who get treated with the drug successfully clear the virus and stay on to remain healthy. But it's something to think about, if you can develop a cheaper alternate to treating HCV. And there are other ways through which you can modulate the immune response against a variety of pathogenic conditions, not just immune system, but cancer and heart. There are microRNAs are everywhere. So if you develop a very fair understanding of how they work and how you can target, then you have nothing to worry. You can treat wherever you want once you develop that part.
Seems like a very it seems like a great research area that will actually benefit a lot of people. Just the opinion question. Do you think the current funding, in terms of like government funding and for research like this, is sufficient enough for them to take off and get to the consumers, or do you think there's more?
Like any other research, every researcher likes to think that my research is what will change the course of disease. But I think more companies are taking more interest than conventional government agencies. Because this microRNA, as I said, is floating in the blood. If you have a cancer, if you have a glioma, it's a brain cancer, there is a test that you can take the blood of a glioma patient, and there is a signature of microRNAs through which you can diagnose very early on in the patient that he has glioma. So that's what companies are liking about. It's very diagnostic. It has very lot of diagnostic purposes besides being able to treat the condition. So in a nutshell, I think more companies are jumping onto this rather than research organizations. But there's a fair amount of enthusiasm. I wouldn't say it's not.
I have a question I have to ask, because we talk about luck playing a role, right? How, of the 26,000 microRNAs that you could play around with, you zoomed in on 221 with all these wonderful results that accrued?
Well, 221 has been shown to get modulated in different situations. What we did a good job of is to tease out the mechanism of interferon alpha somehow working through the same principles of immune signaling. But as I said, we screened 500 microRNAs out of 26,000, and we got a lot of different microRNAs. This is just one. We got so many other interesting patterns, which I didn't talk about. Let's say, example, I got microRNA 155, and we got microRNA 20, microRNA 120. So we got a bunch of microRNAs, but we could only spare our energy and our time to follow one particular story. We had 500 potential leads, or at least 300 to 400, but we decided to follow 221. Someone else may have followed another story. every microRNA has a story, I guess.
Did you have instances like that too, Boris, in your work where you didn't see anything that could happen and that almost like magic?
I think there was a relative to our work, there was the finding of Maxine was an interesting one. You probably heard about this material where it was basically exactly, yeah, where it was etched out. Basically, they were using HF to help dissolve away some substrate that they were using for imaging, but they kept this material that was showed completely lacked promise for a long time, and then they just kept it in solution for too long. Were able to. They actually had a pretty violent reaction from what I've seen pictures of a few went after that, and are able to get pretty interesting two-dimensional structure. Some interesting properties that they're exploring.
Oh.
Just one question for both the presenters. Are there any research that is funded by both companies as well as government agencies? Like part of the project is funded by a company and part of the same project or some aspect is funded by NSF or NIH or something like that. And if that happens, what happens to the requirement that research should be in open access environment after 6 months or whatever?
Well, for example, the work that I was doing to develop the hydrogen fuel cell was actually a SBIR project. So that's something that, so it was an endeavor funded both by us, by the Office of Naval Research, and by a private company, because to develop the system, the funding for a phase 1 contract is very low, so most of the work has to be financed by private companies. With supercapacitors and batteries, obviously a lot of the basic research is also funded by grants through DOD, DOE, NIH, etc. But private companies have to put funds in. I think that in terms of making things open access, I think it's it just really depends on the specific application, because the companies who make this and make it commercially, which is the end goal of all this work, really, they need to have some incentive to hold on to get a return on the investment that they put into this work. So it's usually a combination of some trade secret and patent. And for journals that publish research, again, I think that the trade-off there is, again, costs of maintaining their database of articles and maintaining that infrastructure. And I don't think I can really answer the question of if everything. I don't think it should be an all or nothing approach. I don't think all data should be open access. I don't think any of it should be. I think it's some middle ground where some work can go into open access and some cannot.
Your answer brings up a question that I again must also toss in the direction of you too. When I was doing research, it never mattered to me whether there were going to be any societal benefits that would come from my work on nuclei and stuff like that. Are you too moved in any way by the fact that, look, whatever it is that you're doing will eventually have these benefits that go beyond just what it is that you're finding that it comes out of basic science?
Yes, definitely. It's too hard of a business to stay in. It's just too hard. You don't get paid like 60 salaries, to be honest. The only thing that kept me motivated was to find something kind of fascinating. Not be very, not kind of jumping ahead of myself, but this definitely needs to be step by step. And if you're not motivated, it's very difficult.
I think that there's a trade-off there, because I think that just going to the lab with the thought of I'm going to save the world today is kind of useless. No one's going to be able to do that. I think that every finding has to be oriented to some goal, intermediate or final. I think that obviously most findings don't make their way into something to change the world, but I think that a lot of findings partially lend a little bit, and also they can lend some ideas to discovery of new ideas, which lead to discovery of new ideas, and those might. So I think that it's important to determine the useful outcomes of every project, but I think that has to be sort of done in moderation again.
Any other questions? Or one last question, because you guys are still hanging around. What do you think you will be doing 3 years from now?
I obviously want to take this forward. We're actually talking to a company in Science Center. It's called Rosetta Genomics. This is purely microRNA-based company. They developed, that's where he worked actually, in one of his first jobs. So they are companies that just use the fascinating power of these small molecules, enter the cells and fix something in the cell, whether it be cancer or immune response against a virus. They're very focused on just using microRNAs. So we are actually trying to talk to them and show them our data. I actually think we can take it forward if we can send an infected cell to 21, or for instance, so many other microRNAs that I have discovered along the way. It'll be interesting. Very interesting. So 3 years from now, I think maybe if we can somehow show some proof of principle in clinical models and try to take it into clinical practice.
I'd like to continue research in making our energy more sustainable, and I think the good thing is that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of flexibility there, because as I pointed out, making energy more sustainable could involve making the storage more efficient, its use more efficient, its transmission more efficient. Anything from LED lights that consume less energy to displays to processors that may run more efficiently, to ways of transmitting energy that may require new materials that make it more efficient and require fewer losses, can sort of chip away the problem of increased energy demand and lack of any sustainable supply. So my hope is to continue working somewhere in that direction.
Well, we've had 2 very exciting and interesting presentations. Now, would you please join me in thanking Boris and Mohit?